What's going on, everybody? Tej back again with another video, and today I'm giving you my early 2023 edge rankings as we get closer to the 2023 NFL Draft, and hopefully you will enjoy today's video. If you do, seriously, it would help me and my channel out a ton if you hit that like button. And if you're new around here, you want to see more draft, more football content in your life, like what you see today, just hit that big red subscribe button, and give me your edge rankings down below in the comment section. Got a feeling there's going to be a lot of Will Anderson at 1, but tell me how it shakes out 2 through 5 in your opinion. Who are some honorable mentions, and is there somebody I left off this list that you think I'm wrong in doing so? Let me hear it down below in the comment section. It's a conversation. I respond to every comment. So let's talk about this edge group down below. So if you're new to this series, welcome to it. We're now getting into our defensive rankings, and then I'll do another updated mock draft, and then we're starting to get creeping closer towards the heat of the NFL Draft and its season. But if you're new to it, I'm going to go through my rankings 5 up to 1, and then we'll start talking about some honorable mentions. So let's start with Isaiah Foskey coming from Notre Dame. I am a Fighting Irish fan, so I am a little biased here, but guy who's just made steady progress throughout his career at Notre Dame, and I'm really excited to see what it's gotten out to a tumultuous start for Coach Freeman, but excited to see what that defense and Isaiah Foskey looks like in it. He's a nice edge in regards to being able to be an impact player in the run. We'll kind of talk about some guys later on, even here in the top 5, that anything you get in the run game is kind of a bonus, but Foskey, that's definitely one of his biggest strengths, is he'll be a combo factor there. He can get to the quarterback, but he can also be factor in the run game. Nice blend of size, speed, and burst as well. So he's well-rounded. He doesn't do necessarily anything explosive or extraordinary. He's not number 1 in this class, I would say, at anything, but he does a lot of things right. And that makes him a really easy, safe number 5 on this list. And honestly, if he came out last year, there's probably a good shot he ends up going to the end of the first round or top of the second. So it's another year and playing under Coach Freeman. I'm excited to see what that does for his draft stock. I'm feeling like he's still probably in that first round conversation. Moving on to Andre Carter. I have multiple times on this channel described him as a locomotive coming your way if you're an offensive tackle. And I mean that in so many different ways. One, when you look at his size, arm length, power, and hand violence, it's the equivalent of seeing a locomotive coming your way, because dude's big. Dude also has a fair amount of explosiveness off the line. Like when he comes right at you, if you're a tackle, look out. And he's just one of those guys where if a tackle blinks or sneezes or whatever, just doesn't see him coming, it feels like what it would be like if I was on train tracks and a train just didn't see me, and it goes right through me. So that's what Andre Carter feels like in a ton of ways. The reason I have him at 4, you could bump him up over Felix Anudike-Uzomah at 3. I could see that argument. 2 different types of guys who win, and kind of going into this, not necessarily these guys are the same edge prospect from the 2021 group that I'm going to use, but Andre Carter is very much more of that Karlaftis edge rusher, where he's strong, he's big, really good with his hands, violent with his hands, and he wins on top of that with a high motor. So kind of that size and power profile with a high motor. And then Felix Uzomah is more like a Drake Jackson, where it's speed and bend off the edge, and he's a little bit lighter. So kind of tit for tat, I tend to be a little bit more biased towards those speedy, bendy guys. So that's a little bit of my explanation there. And, this is just key. Anybody who's, new to the draft cycle, not that I'm any expert, no, Todd McShay or anything like that, but identifying your draft biases is a huge part of recognizing your strengths and weaknesses as a draft fan, a draft analyst, if you want to call me that. But yeah, so I tend to be a little bit biased towards those bendy guys. But that being said, Andre Carter is going to go in the first round. And in my last mock, I had him going to the Eagles at 13. And, honestly, in that 10 to 20 range, I feel pretty comfortable with it where it is right now. The biggest thing holding him back right now is that he plays in an academy school. So where Anudike-Uzomah plays in the Big Ten, Miles Murphy plays in the ACC, Will Anderson plays in the SEC, those Power 5 conferences kind of gives you a little bit of an edge there versus somebody who plays at Army and is not going to really see that steep a competition. But again, size, power, pretty explosive off the line, great hand usage, and a high motor. He checks a lot of boxes as that, power profile edge. And then Felix Anudike-Uzomah, kind of talked about this a little bit, more of that speed bend type, and legitimately might have the best bend in this class. I mean, that's crazy to say because Will Anderson's a freak. So, we'll talk about him obviously a little bit later on, but he's that guy where I'm talking about earlier on, where anything you get in the run game is kind of a plus. And there's some names on the honorable mention that will be in that same consideration. That's a little risky for me because I think of a Yannick Ngakoue, and it's like, as much as he brings to the table as a pass rusher and he does that well, he's also such a huge liability when it comes to run. I don't think Anudike-Uzomah will be that abysmal, putrid against the run, if you will. But that is kind of my concern going from the college to the NFL ranks. But if he can find himself in a Nick Bonitto situation, kind of another one of those speedy, bendy guys, where he can kind of just focus on being strictly a DPR, third down pass rusher type early on in his career, I think that bodes well. Maybe he's able to gain some weight. But that being said, dude is lightning quick off the line and super bendy. And he does play in one of those Power 5 conferences, so he does have steep competition. And, I just love to see the practice tape, honestly, him against Connor Beebe, who was my top interior offensive lineman but plays guard for the Wildcats. That's a fun battle in and of itself in my eyes. So he's one of these guys where if he goes anywhere from, I'm not crazy about him, maybe at 10, maybe I'm a little more comfortable with the upside of Andre Carter, especially considering he is coming from a smaller school. I'd like to see him once he gets to, the NFL ranks and that strength and conditioning program, that way of, coaching up players. I think that's more interesting to me. But in DK Uzama, if he went anywhere from 15 to 25, I'd feel pretty good about that, especially if you're a team that already has maybe a power rusher and you want somebody with a little bit more burst off the other edge. I think he's a good fit for that. And then we get to Myles Murphy, and all-world athlete. And that Clemson defensive line, obviously we're going to get to the interior guys next up, and Brian Brzee is an animal in and of itself when it comes to his athletic profile. Obviously former number 1 overall recruit. Myles Murphy might have a beat, man. I mean, I don't know. It's close, but pretty sure he was on the Bruce Feldman Freaks list. Can't say that for certain, but if he wasn't, definitely should have been. Guy's an animal, and it's kind of exciting to see now at Clemson as they depart from Brent Venables, who had a lot of three-man fronts. Now he's the head coach at Oklahoma. Hopefully that creates a few more one-on-ones with Myles Murphy, because last year he was just getting double teams left, right, and center. And he was still a good enough athlete to be able to break it, but it just came a little too late in the play. Also, I'd love to see Clemson's offense be a little bit more than what they've been so far this year, and certainly more than what we saw last year, and have this team playing in big games, because I want to see what Myles Murphy looks like under the lights in those big primetime settings. And I want to see him in the college football playoff. That's the biggest stage you can have at that level of play. So I love to see him there. I'm not entirely sure we'll see Clemson there, but we'll have to wait and see there. But phenomenal athlete, great size to go with at 6'5", 275. He is the body of an NFL pass rusher, but the skill sets of an NFL pass rusher. So yeah, he's going to become an NFL pass rusher here very soon, and probably a guy who's going to the top 10, if not even earlier than that. So then we get to Will Anderson Jr. I'm not going to say anything you haven't heard here, and just has the entire profile, really, because on top of being this guy who can win with speed and bend and burst, he can also win with power, just a complete pass rush skill set, and great with his hands as well, knows multiple moves, like 17 and a half sacks last year playing for Alabama, doesn't come out of nowhere. So I'm not saying anything that's, breaking new ground here, but also great against the run, which is really surprising, because him and DK Uzama, when it comes to their weight profile, not that different. But Will Anderson just finds a way to play bigger than that, which, that's lazy scouting, but that's really the only way I can describe it, because I'm not entirely sure how he does it. But I guess that comes down to his strength and natural ability, and a ton of credit to him in the weight room. He plays bigger and stronger than what his weight is. So because of that, he's also an impact player in the run game. So just a complete edge, and right now my number 1 player in this draft class. So especially if you don't take into account position value, but even if you do, edge rusher, it's not quarterback, but to me it's the next best thing. So getting to the quarterback, Will Anderson, that's going to put him in a position where he's probably a top 3 pick, if not number 1 next year, barring anything crazy. Now, of course, all old takes exposed. This could look crazy in about 6 months, but let's go ahead and move on to my honorable mentions now. BJ Ojulari is a really interesting player, and kind of like what I talked about, Felix and DK Uzama, I'd love to see him in this Nick Bonitto situation where, he's drafted late day 2 or something like that, and DK Uzama is going to go way before that. But if Ojulari can be someone who goes, mid to late second and is solely used as a DPR initially, I think that'd be a great use of his skill set, because this guy's not going to be an impact player when it comes to stopping the run, at least not right away. And he wins with finesse moves, and he's a speed bend profile type of edge rusher. He's a finesse rusher for sure. So I'd like to see him in kind of a Bonitto situation where he can kind of focus on getting the quarterback in first, and maybe once he gets to the NFL level, add some more weight, add some more strength, and become an every down starter. Or maybe if he just goes to a defense that has, naturally this kind of comes to mind, Philadelphia, where he plays next to a Jordan Davis type, and it's like, hey, that guy's going to eat up blocks. You worry about the quarterback. He'll stop the run. So a situation like that, I think, would be ultimately massively beneficial. But it's also an interesting, comparison to him and his brother Azeez Ojulari, now going into his second year at the Giants. And he actually was pretty good against the run last year. So it'd be interesting to see if Ojulari gains that skill set. Because I don't know if I ever really thought of Azeez Ojulari coming out of Georgia as a high-level run stopper. But he did that at a pretty decent rate. Also had 8 sacks last year for the Giants. So if you care about that type of metrics, that's going to be a positive sign. Hopefully that boosts the stock of BJ Ojulari. He does play in the SEC too, which certainly goes a long way. Then we get to Nolan Smith. highly touted recruit, freak of an athlete, legitimately has, some sort of 757, big airplane jet behind him. Dude moves like very few at the college ranks, especially at the edge position. So that athletic profile and highly recruiting background, the question kind of is like, what took him so long to get on the field? And he's just not a polished pass rusher. The technique needs to get better. The amount of moves he can use needs to be improved. Like, he needs to gain more tools in his arsenal, if you will. So there's a lot to work to be done. But if an NFL team is looking for a straight athlete they can coach up, Nolan Smith's going to be on the top of their list. Like, I think of the Green Bay Packers and the great job they've done with Rashawn Gary. Let's say if Nolan Smith was on the board there in the 3rd round or something like that, I could see them being like, he's not ready to win right now. But neither was Rashawn Gary. And that dude's an athlete. Rashawn was an athlete. We can work this out. So I think that's what it's going to kind of take. It's going to take a team that, or like a Baltimore that's had a great track record of developing edge rushers. Maybe a Pittsburgh playing opposite of TJ Watt. A situation like that where it's like, hey, this guy can be coached up. And then he's an awesome athlete learning how to play the edge rushing position. And if it all comes together, guy could be an animal, and he could certainly be one of those guys where in half a decade's time, where if it all truly comes together, we're like, man, was Nolan Smith not one of the top 32 players in that draft class? Because certainly feels like it now, but he's just not there when it comes to actually being an NFL ready pass rusher. But dude, when it comes to an athlete and size perspective, he checks a lot of boxes there. Then we get to Zach Harrison, who kind of similar enough, checks a lot of boxes. 6'6", 275, looks like an NFL edge rusher, and early reports runs in the 4.4s. That's great. Straight line speed, awesome. The problem with Harrison is, one, his consistency. Some weeks he has it, some weeks he doesn't. But then also bend. This guy is not even kind of, he's just really stiff. Now that might be a profile that, again, kind of talk about Nolan Smith, maybe an NFL team's like, hey, well, that's a lot of what we said about Montez Sweat, and we see how that worked out. He just needs to, be coached up. We got to find a role. But Harrison, I don't know. He's kind of a tough player because that 275 mark, it's like, can he add some weight and maybe play 3-4 D end? Because then you're talking about, hey, straight line explosiveness, go right through a guard. And I think he has good pass rush moves and technique. It's just hard to get around tackles for him. He just doesn't have that type of bend. Like, if you gave B.J. Ojulari, you took that bend from him and gave it to Zach Harrison, this guy's a first rounder, and he's the next of the Bosa's, the Chase Young. He's the next Ohio State guy to go in the first round. He just doesn't have that, and he's also lacking consistency, I think, partially because of that. So definitely a work in progress, but maybe it's putting on 25 pounds or 15, 25 pounds and having to play that 3-4 DN spot. Or maybe it's just a team taking a chance and saying, hey, Sweat learned how to, cope with the lack of bend and lateral movement. Nothing saying Zach Harrison can't do the same thing in our defense. So not really a first rounder in my eyes, which is kind of wild, because if you're a fan of the draft and you're just been following names like this, he's a guy who was in my way too early 2021 mock draft. We've been kind of waiting for him to break out, but ultimately just hasn't come together. But that said, that means there's a lot of talent, and people have been waiting for it to kind of all come together. And maybe it's just a matter of time before he ends up in the right spot with the right coaches, and it does all eventually come together. Darrell Nachami, this guy would have been kind of similar to Zach Harrison, where Harrison, it's like, the bend is concerning, its consistency isn't there. For Nachami, it's just like, dude, stay on the field. Was really impressive as a freshman, then gets hurt in 2019, gets hurt a handful of snaps into 2020, and then plays 5 games in 2021 before getting hurt. Dude has unbelievable bend, speed bursts. Again, I'm a little biased to these types of edge rushers, but now he's a redshirt senior, and he's played like 12, 15 games. I had to double check that, so don't take that for certain. But considering where he is in his collegiate eligibility, dude has not seen the field that much. And that's really, if he can check that box this year, stay on the field, and even through the first 2 games for Maryland, hasn't really played that much. But if he can just play the entire slate and we see that talent on display, he's a little old. I wouldn't rule out the back of the first round, though. And I know that's crazy, but this guy would have been drafted a couple years ago if he stayed healthy. He would have been drafted last year if he stayed healthy, So the talent's undeniable. It just comes down to, can this dude prove that he can stay healthy? And it also is interesting. I almost think of like what the Rams have done with, recovery and prioritizing that part of the downtime between games and in the offseason. Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe as much as you move from the college level to the NFL ranks and each game takes a bigger toll on you, maybe he needs to go to a club and an organization that prioritizes that recovery period and will allow him and give him the tools he needs to be able to keep his body fresh week to week and be able to stay on the field. Now, again, this is probably not a guy, as much as I say, hey, if he stays healthy and we see that talent maybe back to the first round, I am saying that because it would be a surprise pick, kind of like a Peyton Turner from 2020. But that said, I don't rule it out. But if he is in that day 2 category, or maybe even early day 3 if he gets banged up again, I go back to this Nick Benito situation. I could see where Darrell Njami gets into that type of spot, focuses on getting the quarterback, and maybe if he goes to a team that prioritizes that recovery process, keeps him out on the field, he could be a sneaky, really solid pick. And again, one of those names where we look back at and like, did he really need to go in the 4th round? Couldn't he have gone earlier? Or something like that. Now, granted, we're talking hypotheticals here, so there's 1,000 ways this could all break out, obviously. But it'll be an interesting player to watch his stock, especially if he plays the entire season, because then I think he's going to have a great combine. You're going to see the talent. And I think he's on a hot name. It may take some time. Maybe other people aren't really hot on him until February and March, leading up into April, but I can still see it nonetheless. And now lastly, Zion Tupuola-Fetui. I'm hoping I'm saying that name right. From Washington, he's going to be kind of a player that if Joe Tryon-Shoyinka looks really good this year, that's going to kind of in tandem boost his stock. But only about 240 pounds. And the reason I bring that up is he's one of these interesting players. Different situation from Joseph Osai, who was this inside linebacker who then moved to edge for Texas. But given his size, I almost wonder, and not necessarily the best pass rush when it comes to technique, I almost wonder if, what defenses prioritize him. 3-4 as an outside linebacker or 4-3 as a will. And somebody who can blitz from that, off-ball linebacker spot. So it'll be interesting to just see what NFL teams kind of think of him and, where they prioritize him, what defenses prioritize his skill set. That being said, good first step, but nothing crazy about the rest of his game. So that's a little frustrating. But given somebody with that type of first step, there's always a pretty high potential. And again, I am biased to those guys. So if they have that first step, that's just not something you can coach. You can coach, hand placement. You can teach them new moves, how to beat tackles and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see his progression this year. It could be a name that shoots up boards and becomes kind of a consensus day 2 guy. I can totally see that world coming together. But again, the reason I really have him on here is just kind of a name to monitor because the stock will change a ton throughout the season. But I'm interested to see 4-3-3-4. Like, where does this guy fit in? But all in all, this is a really impressive edge group, and I'm excited to see, especially considering the last couple of years. Aiden Hutchinson, Trevon Walker. Those stories still need to be written and told. But that edge group was a step up from 2020, but 2020 wasn't all that impressive. But compared to this year's edge group, it's really impressive. Even just going back to my top 5, like Will Anderson would have been the number 1 pick in my opinion last year. So again, speaking of how good this edge group is, it's as good as it's been in a couple years now. So for teams, if your favorite team needs some edge rush help, this could be the year to find it. I think you'll be able to find it on days 2 and 3. Kind of like what we've been talking about with tackles. There's so many the last couple of years that they've fallen, kind of trickled down the draft board. And wide receivers too. This year could be the edge rushing position that kind of gives you that draft surplus value where you get this guy in the 3rd round and it's like, yeah, he should have probably gone earlier than that if he just played in, or if he was in a part of any other draft class where there wasn't this much edge depth. But I digress. That's going to do it for my 2023 early edge rankings. These are going to change a ton. But give me your takes down below in the comments section. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Who do I leave off this list that you think I'm crazy for? And of these names, who are you excited to see throughout the rest of the college football season? It's a conversation down below in the comments section. I respond to every comment. So let's talk about this edge group down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. It really would help me out a ton. If you're right here want to see more sports content, just hit that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej. I'm signing off.